Hi everyone. So there's a couple of things that I noted while I was listening, and Andreas, you dropped a little thing out there about mock impoliteness, and sort of said someone asked me about that. So I think that I would first start off with what's the purpose, or what would you kind of summarize the purpose of mock politeness as being?
I don't know. Yeah, okay, I'm going to answer that in a roundabout kind of way, and just say that it is very culturally specific. I think I grew up in the southeast of England, where I think mock impoliteness is possibly much more common than it would be across the Atlantic in America. I could be wrong. In the United States, I'm just speaking about experiences I've had trying to play around with impoliteness with American friends and really not succeeding. Also in Australia, I think it's very popular as well, and you have things like Australian rhyming slang, looking at things like that. Sorry, Mark, can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So what is the purpose of it as a kind of a linguistic tool? I totally agree with you. We in the UK use it a huge amount, but in a communicative sense, what is the kind of the unwritten message of us when we use it? What are we aiming to do with that? What are we aiming to achieve?
Yeah, okay, I missed that completely. I think it goes back to what I was saying about the initial greetings. I mean, why do we have so many greetings in English? It's because the purpose is that we try to, when we are speaking, we try to connect with the hearer. And we try to find things like we would use, if I met an Australian, I might say good day. And that's for the reason that I would want to connect to that hearer and to make that person like me. The same thing with impoliteness. It's really interesting, I find, because we will say things that on paper, we were speaking about intonation before, if it's written down, it's going to look really hard. But we can use it in such a way, like Gabby says here, to be playful, to connect with each other and kind of build this sense of community, sense of being in something together, I guess.
I would totally agree with that. This weekend I met up with some old friends from school. There was a kind of a wedding and someone with that. I haven't seen some of these people since 1998. And the first thing one of my oldest friends did to me was insult me massively. And it was very much about, we can say that to each other because we have that connection and close bond. And he knew that I wasn't going to be offended by it. However, if he'd said it to a stranger, that would have been a pretty different situation. So it is, isn't it? It's all about the context of that relationship, the friendship that has, despite not speaking for the best part of 20 years, exists in that context. And it allows him, in that case, to say to me, we still have this relationship. It's a kind of, it was doing that to us. Yeah, I totally agree. It's a way of saying actually our friendship is more because we can insult each other.
Exactly. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'm just thinking, I had a very close friend, and I asked him to, long time ago, to write something for a website that I was putting together at the time, and I said, could you please just write a short reference as to who I am? And he wrote something like, good for nothing, all the clothes he owns he got off the back of a lorry, don't trust anything he says. And I loved it. I thought it was really funny because I knew him. But I showed that to my students in Germany, and they were shocked. They thought, how can you even talk to this guy, So
it's interesting. Gabby sort of said, do you think polite impoliteness is actually transferable? We can't really teach that. I don't know what you think to that. I have a definite response, but I'll pass that one to you, and then I'll perhaps come in as well.
By transferable, I guess, Gabby, you mean in between different countries or different codes or regions or L1 and L2? It's different, I think. It's not used in the same way. I think impoliteness is definitely, if I think about the languages that I speak, like in Sweden, impoliteness is huge. I don't think that their mock impoliteness would transfer to English. And in the same way that the English impoliteness would not transfer to others. We can't really teach that when we teach L2. True, we can't teach it, but we can draw our students' attention to it, I think. And that's the point that I'm trying to make. I'm not saying go and teach pragmatics to your students and this is how your students can be more pragmatically aware. But it's drawing attention to the fact that language is not what I said at the beginning, just getting this message across.
I have to say that was totally my response when I saw this. We can't teach it, and we shouldn't necessarily expect, in the same way as I don't think we should. I would like to think we've moved beyond teaching connected speech so that our students attempt to imitate a particular, what I hate the term, native speaker accent, but we should hopefully be raising awareness of the fact that this is what you might expect to hear for best communication. However, this is probably the way that you want to be communicating. Similarly, I would say we raise awareness that this exists. This is how it happens. You might not want to imitate it. It might not be appropriate. I think arguably it isn't appropriate to kind of imitate it most of the time. But being aware that it exists enables students to understand communication that might otherwise have been, what's happening here? You know, exactly. This isn't a norm. And Sue has kind of added to that. And absolutely, the kind of the British response is almost always to try and soften situations where directness is there. We are very indirect, and to go for the laughter option. If you actually look at because I teach cross-cultural communication at university, if you look at the negotiation styles of Brits, it starts very indirect, and then if there is an obstacle, the favoured way of getting over the obstacle is not actually, as it would be in a country like France, to kind of use rhetorical flourishes and logic. We just try and laugh it off. We try and eradicate that block by laughing through it because it's our comfort zone. It's the bit that we can do. There's a really good question come in the Q&A from Warren, who said, I'd love to hear more ideas for ways of getting students working with this in the classroom, like the reverse role play activity. So do you have any other kind of activities that you would just throw out there, Andreas, that people could employ?
Probably my biggest tip, I think, is when you meet new students and they come to you and they want to learn English, to be able to communicate in English, find out, it's probably, I'm preaching to the converted, but find out who your students are going to be dealing with. Are they going to be speaking to other people using English as a second language because it's the same language that they can communicate together with? Or are they going to go to an English-speaking part of the world? If that is the case, if they're going to an English-speaking part of the world, my biggest tip, as I mentioned before, I think in my recording, is to go and listen to conversations, listen to things that take place in those places. So not just films and series, but I want to share this with you. It's my favorite online toy. It's called Radio Garden. And sorry, I just put that in the private chat. I'm going to share that with everybody. Radio Garden. Have a look at it. It's, for me, I grew up in the 80s. I used to have a shortwave radio and I used to sit and play with the radio and see what I could find. Radio Garden just takes that to a whole new level. You get a globe and you can go to anywhere in the world. You can play around with the globe and listen to radio stations from that place as they're happening live. And you can just say, for example, you want to hear how people communicate, not just how the words and the language that they use, but how they interact with each other in, for example, Toronto. You can go to Toronto and you'll get a whole list of radio stations, and you can go through them and find conversation and see how people interact. That's probably the biggest tip that I would say to start introducing people to.
I mean, that would make a fantastic real life listening experience where you set that as a task. Choose a city where you know English is a spoken language, go and listen to some conversations and report back on it.
Yeah.
You know, bring back, what language did you know? What language did you think was unique that they were using? What would you not expect to find here? You know, all of these different questions, or what did you hear that I've never taught you? All of those types of questions would be really, really engaging. I'm just going to come back because Gabby's said in the chat here, there's no need to sensitize students to it. I have to say, I would disagree. I think, as Andreas said, context for what your students need is paramount. But if I were doing a general English course at anywhere probably above B1, I would be definitely trying to include elements of this. And I used to have an exercise where I'd just write 5 or 6 short text messages on the board. And they would be in kind of different registers. So I was looking at pragmatics from, I suppose, the opposite end. And my question would always be, well, what's the context? Who's contacting who? How do you know? What are the clues? What tells you that? You know, and that was really interesting for examining what students didn't understand about the messages they were sending when they were contacting other people. Because, you know, I would do this from friends to say, well, you write to me like this, but this is not what you think is happening. You know, you are having pragmatic failure because actually I'm reading this and I'm either laughing at you, I'm reading this and going, you really can't write to me like that. That is not okay. So yeah, I would recommend that 5 or 4, 3, or however many you fancy, but don't overload it. You want them to properly think about it and get them to create the context that exists for that sentence. Who's writing to who? You know, we're obviously going on likelihood and probability, but you will get some words like, well, actually, this could be someone being sarcastic. This could be overly formal for that reason. This could be someone engaging with someone in terms of, you know, this is 2 very close friends who have mocked up this pseudo 19th century conversation about just buying a bag of rice. You know, all of those things exist, and it's our job to raise awareness of this, I would argue, for our students, because if we don't, there's a likelihood that that would be a side language that forever isn't there. Below that level, there's a perfectly legitimate likelihood, I would say. But
I'm forever trying to defend the fact that I think below that level, even there is a place for it as well. I'm going to take this opportunity to plug a series of books. I don't know if you can see this here. This is from the Japanese English Language Teaching Association, where they have a SIG. It's the only teaching association that I know of, but they have a Pragmatic SIG. And when I wrote my book, I was contacted by these guys, and they've put together some lovely little books of activities that you can do, pragmatic activities that you can do in the classroom. And very similar to your text message activity, they suggest just working with names. So I'm just going to write in the chat for a moment.
Interesting.
And I've just put in the chat some different things, different names that people would call me. So you would start, this is an activity you can try with students when you meet them for the first time, and they can be A1 level, and you write these names on the board. So Andreas Grundtvig, where would I use that name? Who would call me that? Would my wife come home in the evening and say, hello, Andreas Grundtvig, how are you? No, she wouldn't. She would use another name. My students, they struggle with Grundtvig, so I let them call me Mr. G. They like that. It was their invention, I think. Deus, a friend calls me that. Another friend calls me Dre, or Dr. Dre. I used to present before COVID. I used to present quite a bit in Africa, and there it's assumed that if you go to a teaching conference and you speak, you're automatically a doctor. So they used to call me Dr. Grundtvig all the time. And just from your name, the different names that you have, you can get a whole lesson out of who says what, in what context, where, and that. And then you can go on to hello, hey, you know, yeah.
No, fantastic. That's a great exercise. I really like that. I think it's got so, again, it just takes something that is so overlooked and explores what it tells us. Absolutely.
I'm just going to give them another plug in the chat.
Gabby, you've got your hand up.
Yeah.
Hello?
Hello.
Oh, hi. Hi, Mark. Hi, Andreas.
Hi, Gabby.
Yeah, hi. Sorry, I just feel like I have to speak, Mark. So, you know, I may be playing the devil's advocate again, and I really don't wish to oversimplify pragmatics or anything like that. But you know, for kind of teaching purposes, is it not just the case of pragmatics being simply, being the case of teaching register and connotations, and that's all that there is to it? Like, you know, things that you were earlier discussing, mock impoliteness and say, I don't know, you know, teaching students how to not sound aggressive and how to not be impatient, I don't know, or sound too authoritarian, then, I mean, is it not just something that we as English teachers really can't do? Because, you know, the question is, as people and as teachers, are we pragmatically competent? So how can we even teach this? I mean, I really feel, I feel like I'm not making myself clear, but all I'm trying to say is it not just the case of simply teaching register and connotations? So what does it even mean to teach pragmatics in the classroom?
Excellent question, I think, and I totally see your point. In my recording that you've just seen, I tried to avoid things like getting too heavily into pragmatic theory. I didn't speak about the politeness principle and the maxims of Leach and Grice. Leach and Grice. For that reason, because pragmatics is what's kind of behind it. But really, with our students, we just need to be speaking about context, speaking about how register changes, how things can be said differently, intonation, formality, how we play with language. But I think at the same time, I think so many of us miss this in our teaching. We focus so much on the grammar, getting the grammar right. And you ask your students, okay, if you ask your students, what would you like to do on this course? And 9 times out of 10, they'll say the tenses or the times, because that's what they've been taught. And they think that's the route to the language.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with you, Andreas. Like, if we even think of, you know, feedback we give to our students, it's mostly about grammar, lexis, pronunciation. Hardly ever do we say something about how people actually come across, right? So how they sound. But and this is absolutely true. I mean, my problem is simply kind of, I can't see where the boundaries are, like, because pragmatics could mean, teaching it could essentially mean that you impose your own interpretation of certain things on your students, right? So and also this transferability from L1 to L2. If someone can be playful with language in L1, they will know how to do it in L2. All they need to know is the connotations of the words they learn, and the register. And the rest is essentially your personality, your identity as a person and as a speaker of a particular language. So this is my I don't want to say issue with pragmatics. I simply don't know. I can't feel where the boundaries are in the classroom. So what do we really teach, and what is it that you just leave and let it be and leave it to students and their interpretation? And I really feel that it's all about register and connotations, and then exposure to language is very important, and you mentioned it as well. But then again, I put it in the chat box that exposure may not be enough for students to actually notice the pragmatic norms. So the fact that someone may be exposed to a lot of English doesn't necessarily mean that they will understand the norms, right? But I guess that's a different point I'm making now.
My question here is not directed to you alone, Gabby, but to myself as well. I mean, as a teacher, what is our role? Are we supposed to describe the language or to prescribe the language? Are we there to prescribe this is how it should be spoken? Or do we look at the language together with our students and we say this is what happens a lot in the south of England, for example, or in North America, or wherever?
Yeah. I have to say that I really loved the example that you gave in the video. I can't remember exactly. It was something about this toxic person, and that made me feel that, you see, again, you have this one sentence, and then kind of your understanding is totally different. Your students' understanding is totally different, right? Now, and this does not necessarily depend on the context here. So this may actually be something to do with your personality and with your perception of the I mean, of the word toxic. And I don't know, when I was listening to you, when I was watching this video, it just hit me how your understanding of it was different to the understanding of your students. And I didn't feel that it was context dependent.
Okay. I see that Sue wants to, or it would be nice to hear from Sue as well, but I would like to answer that question about the toxic. And I don't know how familiar you are with pragmatic theory, but I mentioned right at the end there, we speak about negative politeness and positive politeness. And I think with the word toxic, I was taking that as being a kind of being what I was speaking to Mark about before as well, about this mock impoliteness, where you've got the word toxic, but what the speaker says is not really what they mean. That was my understanding of it, but I've been told since that by yourselves and by my students that no, we don't see it that way. So maybe that's just me.
Yeah, well, let's ask Sue to share. I can see she disagrees with me, and I laugh when people disagree.
Okay, cool.
Hi.
Hi, Sue.
I was just thinking that I have students who are very, very capable in English, but they can't seem to transfer their personality from their own native language across to English at all. So I'm not sure that I agree with Gabby, where she says that if you have the ability in one language, you can transfer it to the second language.
Now, this is very interesting. So I have to say, because I never thought of it this way, that you cannot transfer your personality from L1 to L2. Perhaps it's because it's two different personalities in a sense. But then, yeah, I mean, I don't know what to say now. I need to think Okay, so I can't just give you the answer now, but I never really felt that this is something that may be an issue, not having the ability to transfer your personality from L1 to L2. But I don't know, maybe we are just now going too deep into psychology and philosophy as opposed to language teaching.
I don't know, to bring it back to language teaching, Sue, what steps do you use in your classroom then to try and kind of help those students?
When I teach, even at very low levels, we start looking at other ways of saying the same thing. And then we start discussing whether it's polite or could have other connotations. So even my A2 students are able to start analyzing what language is doing and finding out in ways that, like Andreas was saying, about how how language matters, and the words you use will depend on the context of who you're speaking to, but also where you are. And people like Germans who've got the Sie du thing forget that there's actually a third option. There's the neutral level in English that allows you to decide that probably 90% of the time it's safer to stay neutral. And so I do a lot of work like that with them. But as I was saying before, there's an old book called Ideas, and it has a section called You Can't Say That. And it looks at things like, speaking to a 7-year-old child, and you can't say to them, what would you like to do in your future career? Because they don't think about doing, they think about being. And so you have to analyze the way you communicate with everybody at different times.
I have to say, I think that totally fits my teaching experience for the last, God, I've been teaching for a long time, 17, 18 years. And I have also noticed exactly the same thing. And one of the, in a way, one of the things that has always been frustrating is when you have huge personalities in your classroom and they desperately want to communicate that in English, but are having all of these pragmatic failures where what they're trying to say is not actually what they're getting across. And you can, as a teacher, we're equipped to see that. But I believe that our job in the classroom is to equip them for outside. So that's why I would really take issue with what Gabby said, because we need to know where they're planning to work after. Because without this level of kind of understanding of the implication of what they're saying, they could be offending people, they could be unsuccessfully communicating, and they're not, I think, going to have the experience from our classroom that will equip them in that context in the future. So I would always take it that way. And I would also say, as Andreas did, that we shouldn't be prescribing what these things mean. We should be having a conversation. Well, what do you think? I think for a lot of people, this would be maybe true, but in your context, that might be accurate as well. Having discussions around, as opposed to straight line, this is the answer, because let's be honest, we're one person with one opinion.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. I wonder if anybody else would like to comment on this. We clearly have a disagreement here, and I love disagreements. So it would be nice for maybe more people to join in. No takers.
Warren, you were commenting earlier, I think, as
I wonder what Warren may actually think about it.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi. I'm afraid I'm very British when it comes to disagreeing. Yeah, it seemed to me that your question, Gabby, really turned on the matter of what the distinction was between pragmatics and and something more, something smaller like register.
Yeah, it's because I sometimes feel that perhaps we are just talking very often. We talk about things that are not necessarily applicable to our daily kind of teaching in classroom. So we talk about pragmatics, we talk about context, and context is very important. I absolutely, don't get me wrong, it's not like I disagree with Andreas here. It's just that I just don't know how much of this and how we actually address it in the classroom, because as far as I'm concerned, it's just a simple case of teaching register and connotations, which is the basic kind of CELTA, teaching rules. So is there anything more to this or not? This is really my question. So yeah,
I'm struggling to say how, but I feel that pragmatics is much more than register.
Mm.
I'm with Warren here. Warren, finish, sorry, and then I've got a point I'd like to make as well.
Yeah, to me, pragmatics would include things like, well, golly, I'm struggling, but I do feel there's much more to it.
There's basically, like, if we go back to the fathers of pragmatics with Grice and Leach, they came up with their two different, very distinct principles. One looking at how things are said and how things are implied. That was called the cooperative principle. And then we got the politeness principle, where we're looking at the impressions that we make. So as well as register, there's all the other kinds of ways that we have of making an impression on the hearers that we're speaking to, but also how we avoid saying things, we imply things. Sorry, Mark, I interrupted.
No. So, go on, Warren.
Sorry, I was going to say I may have something I can come back with, and it may be that I need to be corrected on my understanding of pragmatics, but I just thought of a situation that arose with my young daughter the other day. I'd already arranged that she would be walking to school with a friend. Something had changed. So in the meantime, she had been told by my wife that she wouldn't be. And I said to her something like, "Oh, so you won't be walking to school with Lila today?" And she said, "Yeah, I already know that. Mum told me." Yeah. And I went away, and then I came back and I said to her, she's 9, so I felt she was right for this. I said, okay, so when I said that, it didn't mean I'm informing you that you won't be walking to school with Lila today. It meant all of this. It meant something like, I realized that I promised that you would, and I'm aware that in the meantime, that situation has changed. It's not necessarily my fault, but I was just trying to let you know that it's a bit of a shame, and I feel that for you. And to my understanding, that's related to pragmatics. That's what that utterance means, but it's nothing to do with register.
But this is exactly my point. How do we actually teach it in the classroom? That's exactly the point I was trying to raise. How do we teach this? How much of it is not already the case of identity as a person, like our personality? So where do you draw the line, and if not, then how do you design activities? Because obviously course books are totally devoid. I mean, there are no activities that you could say are, pragmatics focused activities. So my question is, how do you actually teach this?
I'm not sure I'd agree that there's nothing in there that is. I think increasingly, and as Andreas said, if you look at the examining boards, they are including this, which means it's going to be in course books in the future, because where exams follow, general English tends to come behind. And if it's measurable on the CEFL, we have to start including it, because otherwise we're not doing our jobs. But you kept repeating its register and its context. So I've got a connotational difference for you that I've just dropped into the chat, which is I do a whole lesson on the different connotation of synonyms. Heroin and opium, there's only one perfume and it's not called heroin. Because what we take away from the word opium is very different from what we take away from the word heroin.
That was in a private message.
Oh, it's a private message. Sorry. I'm an idiot. I'm an idiot. Here we go. Coming in. So sorry, everyone. This is what I typed. And I do at university level with students who are interested in building vocab and appropriacy. There we go, Sue. Absolutely. Refugees, migrants. Migrants versus expats is another classic one. These words are in one sense synonyms, and they have arguably similar registers, but their connotational value is immensely different. And to me, if we're not teaching that, we're not actually teaching the word. And so I would strip it right back and say, actually, every time I'm in the classroom, I'm teaching elements of pragmatics. Because for me, understanding a word, and I would describe myself as a lexical teacher, I'm a strong disciple of the lexical approach, but to me that includes the pragmatics of the words, where it's appropriate to use it, where it's not, who I would use it with, what different intonation and playing around with that will do to its understanding, what its collocates are. So
but is it not exactly what I said, Mark, that that pragmatics is in the EFL classroom, it's all about teaching register and connotations. So when you introduce...
But you didn't say connotations, Gabby.
I did, many times.
You said collocations, I think.
Oh no, did I? Maybe it's just my accent, okay? No, I did say, sorry, I said...
Yes. Well, but then I think if that's what you're doing, you are teaching pragmatics.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I asked the question, because as far as I'm concerned, it's all about register and connotations. So if we teach connotations, if we clarify connotations of individual lexical items or phrases, if we deal with connotations, then the rest is left to students. I mean, as long as I understand the connotation of a given word, then the way I use the word, it's my identity, it's my pragmatic norms in a sense that will then decide how I play with this word. So it's not something we can teach students because it very much depends on what they already have transferred from L1. So people who are not playful with language will not be playing with English either. See what I'm saying? I mean, I don't know if I'm making myself clear because I'm not quite sure if I'm clear in my head, on where I stand. I just, perhaps it's the lack of clarity that makes me so unclear now.
Do you think we also have to include intonation in there as well?
Yeah, yes. So, and this is what Mark mentioned earlier, right? That I even said that I really, thank you for mentioning this, because no intonation, no pragmatics, right? Because it's how we say, as you said, how many different contexts and ways of saying no. So, yes, sir.
Gabby, you were asking before about, you mentioned the fact that there was no activities, I think if I understood correctly, for you to use in the classroom, even if you are wanting to teach connotations. How do you go about that? I don't like, sorry, maybe it's just me, I don't like this term teaching pragmatics. Teaching pragmatics to me is going to university on a linguistics course and learning about pragmatics. What we're speaking about here, what I hope to speak about here or to get across here is increasing our students' exposure to the language that they want to speak, and also to prepare them for the things that can happen in language, not how to go and use puns and things like that, but to be prepared for them. Mm-hmm. I've put together, Sue just mentioned there, a book. It's called English in Context. I don't know if you can see my screen is doing weird things. It's from Delta Publishing. It's got 80 activities in there that are not intended to go and prescribe, you must speak like this, or you must do things like this, but to, I'm sorry, I'm looking for a better word, but I'm going to use the word awakening, to kind of awaken students to the fact that language is not just about getting this message across. We do so much more with it.
It's raising awareness, isn't it? And a lot of that taps into kind of my interest in the lexical approach, that, you know, it's not about, we're not teaching these words for that specific reason, we're teaching it for the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I hope you. I need to defend myself now. You know, I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit here.
I do it all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, but not 100%, because I do. I mean, I do feel a little bit confused about what we can teach realistically and what we cannot, and. Yeah, so I'm also a little bit confused, I must say, but yes, but I do think that context is absolutely essential. I mean, without context, there's no teaching, and connotations, not collocations, Mark, connotations.
I think I made a mistake, and I think you kept saying context, and to me, connotation is separate from context.
Mm-hmm.
To some degree, but yes. Bye-bye, Sue. Go and do the most important bit, which is the teaching.
Sue, take good care. Thank you for joining us.
So what would be the takeaways for our teachers after this session, Mark and Andreas? Like, what would be the main message that you would like to communicate to teachers, say newly qualified teachers, not just experienced teachers?
I'm just going to quote again the title of my book, English is Context. It's not grammar, it's so much more that we seem to miss. It seems to be, I don't know, in my case, I found myself so many times teaching and saying, yeah, but that depends on the situation, or yeah, that it can work, but it's not appropriate here. And students are really not sure with that. And I think my takeaway would be, yeah, to raise awareness there. Mark, yeah. Maybe you can do better.
No, I mean, totally. I would really agree with that idea of raising awareness. And I would also say that when we go a little bit deeper for students, it enables them outside to realize what's happening. We only normally teach them for maybe 15 hours, 20 hours per week if we're very lucky. Most of their exposure to language is going to be without us being there. And so by having these conversations in a classroom, and I don't think we should do 30-minute lessons on pragmatics. We should be just, though, when we see language, just asking this question. So what's happening there? What's the relationship between these two people? How do you know? If that was a different relationship, what would happen there? Just those little types of conversations, they enable us to equip those students much better for the outside world. And we don't need to call it pragmatics, but that's effectively what it is. But absolutely, as Andreas said, pragmatics is something we study at university. What we should be doing is taking bits of what you can learn from pragmatics, employing it in the classroom so that our students are better able to deal with whatever the world throws at them. And to understand that, when someone has said something, the direct meaning of that might not be what they mean.